Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming down. It's a bit too early for me, so you're gonna have to forgive me if I ramble a little bit. My name's Shay. I'm the founder of the Rebel Dining Society. I also have a restaurant called Death by Burrito. The company's been going for about 4 years now, and we started off as a sort of like a pop-up restaurant dining experience. So like a lot of people when ask me what do I do, what does the company do? Do we do pop-ups, supper clubs, dining events, experiential dining, interactive dining? Sorry, I'm a bit of a mumbler. Sort of like I do kind of all of these things and a bit more. In a nutshell, we like to work with other creative people to kind of work on really fun, kind of interactive food activities. This is just it's a short video clip of the sort of stuff that I do. We tend to work a lot with brands in kind of like creative sort of food-based interactive events that will encompass music, art, sometimes design. And we really like to try and sort of create a kind of customer experience that is that's quite unique and exciting. So this is just a brief example of one of the events we've done in the past with Bombay Sapphire, where we tried to use kind of food and drink to kind of like bring the product to life for the customers.
I'm David Wright. I'm a theatre director, and I've been lucky enough to work with Bombay Sapphire and the Rebel Dining Society, planning and creating some bespoke performances for their Imagination series.
I'm Shay, Ola, the founder, or at least one of the founder members of the Rebel Dining Society.
And we sort of created a walkthrough environment where we sort of spoke about the process of making gin, what went into it, and
It's just about different worlds, different experience. It's just entering into somebody else's imagination for a minute.
For me, imagination is more about trying to escape the kind of like thought cliches that you might let yourself slip into.
I really sort of like try and break down the boundaries or the etiquette that kind of surrounds fine dining. And working with Bombay Sapphire has been like a really good opportunity for us to completely throw away the rule book.
It's been really interesting working with like Shay and Rebel Dining Society. They've got such a great sort of open, really free approach to food and drink, and I think that married with the performance element is really great, and I think people have responded so well to it.
It's certainly full of barrels of imagination. It's I mean, I've been to many events, but this is they've really pulled something quite interesting together.
Most of the people that have kind of done great things in this world have always kind of like pushed the boundaries and sort of like refused to be pigeonholed. And working with Bombay Sapphire has been a massive opportunity for us to kind of really showcase the breadth of our kind of expertise and what we can do.
Beetroot cocktail with gin and some sorbet ball in the middle.
And how was it?
Absolutely delicious.
Okay, so I have a Bombay Sapphire summer twist which really bursts with flavour. Unsurprisingly with Bombay Sapphire, it's got 10 botanicals, it's a fantastic brand.
So that's an example of some of the stuff that we do, but we also try and address quite serious issues in terms of like food that we personally take an interest in. And sort of like one of the projects that we're working on currently is a project with Hendrix Gin, which is about sort of the future of food and sustainability within a luxury food environment. We're sort of looking at the role that sort of big business, food creatives can play in kind of promoting sustainability kind of within our food culture, what the food landscape might look like in the future, and whether or not in particular from my case would be using like insects in our kind of diet. First, like kind of we're sort of like trying to open discussion and debate as what will we be eating in the future. I mean, there's a lot of talk about food scarcity, overpopulation, bad food practices, and we're trying to sort of like consider whether or not other things could come in and substitute our diet. We sort of looked at the factors that would affect kind of like food production, whether or not there'll be enough land to kind of like grow what we need. Also whether technology would have an impact in what we do. You know, there's lab-grown meat that's being developed at the moment, as well as kind of advances in GM crops, and whether or not we would actually accept that and we'll be able to sort of like tolerate that in our diet. And also as people, what would we be prepared to kind of sacrifice in order to kind of like maintain our kind of current consumption sort of like behavior. So this is the sort of thing that I've been playing around with, and I've got another video to kind of show what we did with insects for Hendrix.
Tonight we're doing a press preview for our dinner, which is part of the Hendrix Carnival of Knowledge. Myself and Ryan, who's my business partner, and we do sort of like a lot of events together. I've been working on this concept to do with sustainability. On my part, I've been looking at sustainability within food and insects in particular, and Ryan's sort of been looking at sustainability in terms of zero waste when it comes to the production of like drinks products. We've sort of brought the two things together, and we've created a menu, a food and drinks offering that showcases our kind of ideas and our thoughts in that sense.
Tonight, you know, it was about the future of kind of how our food kind of environment will change. And so we wanted to challenge people, but it needed to be in our style, it needed to be beautiful, very well made food and drinks.
As part of the menu today, I've predominantly been looking at insects and how insects might enter the food chain or might be a part of our diet, especially in the West, in the future in the next 50 years. So the project today is called Project 2063.
It was looking at things like recycling ingredients, minimizing waste, looking at really using a lot of the information that's come from a lot of the research into these problems that people are going to be facing, and making something that was a reflection of that.
I'm really pleased, you know, everyone cleared their plates, which is a really good positive sign, and I've had some conversations with people, you know, and I think we've managed to kind of like change people's perceptions as to what insects are about and how they could potentially like enter into the kind of mainstream food landscape.
Ultimately, we wanted people to have, you know, this was a demonstration of what people could do. So it was a really nice one just to kind of let people enjoy the meal, have a great time, chat, and have the drinks, and they seemed to love it. And everything got finished, polished off, and people walked out with smiles on their faces. So it's the nicest thing to happen, really.
So that's pretty much a snapshot of what my sort of life kind of consists of at the minute. I'm much better when it comes to answering questions than I am to giving talks to people. So feel free to just like ask me anything, and I'll try my best to kind of give you an answer that's a bit more cohesive than what I've just said.
So when it comes to kind of the work that you're doing on sustainability, like, does it just stop at the event, or like how do you make it have broader impact?
I mean, for us, it's more like a sort of a continuous process. I mean, like this whole concept was something that myself and Ryan have been talking about and discussing amongst ourselves for quite a while. And the opportunity to work with Hendrix gave us the chance to actually do it for real and see how people would take and actually open up the debate. In terms of like what we do, sort of like with our business and our work, we continue to sort of add elements of sustainability into what we're trying to do. Like at Death by Burrito, all of my fish that we use at the bar comes from a fisherman down in Cornwall. It's all line caught, it's very sustainable. We ask him what he's got and he just gives it to us. We don't sort of demand. And so, it's kind of nice to sort of try, do some fun stuff that's a bit shocking, but then also kind of practice it as we sort of move along.
And did you get people eating insects?
Oh, absolutely. They didn't have. Well, they knew that there was going to be insects in there, but for us, the idea was not to sort of put like a plate of bugs in front of someone and say, "Eat that." It was like to sort of, if there's a lot of research going into sort of processing insect protein and sort of forming it into things like burgers and sort of chicken nuggets and stuff like that. And we kind of felt if you can't see it, would you be more inclined to eat it? And so that's what this was about. In the form of dim sum, nobody really knew what was in there.
What you get in a Chinese restaurant, probably.
How do you do your research on that, like specifically on this insect sample?
Yeah, I lived in Africa for a bit, so I've eaten my fair share of insects just for the sake of it. So it's not something that's been completely alien to me. But I think there's been a lot of hype recently in terms of the whole insect thing, and it's quite easy to kind of buy this stuff online and to sort of research and to play around with stuff. So I've eaten quite a few before I even decided to kind of give it to anyone else.
The recipes? Yeah.
They're all secret. They're also, the main thing that you find with insects at the moment is that there's not much to them in terms of substance. They have huge nutritional qualities, and you get a lot of, for gram for gram compared to beef, you get a lot more kind of protein out of them. But essentially, it's like a hard shell with sort of like a mushy interior. So for us, it's sort of we've been working with how we sort of take out the protein element, combine it with other things, and then sort of present it back to people. So it's more a nutritional thing than it is a kind of like a taste or a substance thing.
What did you add to create the kind of final recipe about?
With one of the dishes we've done, things like with the dim sum, we use like mushrooms, we use like shallots, the kind of things you don't normally find anyway in a lot of kind of the food that we would sort of eat. But then kind of supplementing the sort of protein element with the insects meant that, at least from a nutritional perspective, it was the same as or better than eating sort of like pork or beef or something like that.
Did you create a process around your collaboration with Hendrix and how they approached you, and then how did you work with them? And what's their expectation from you and how you communicate?
Well, the Carnival of Knowledge as an event is just a series. It sort of travels around sort of the Brighton Fringe, Edinburgh Fringe, and they have a whole kind of like roster of kind of speakers on various different subjects and topics. So, we work with a lot of drinks brands anyway, and we have a relationship with Hendrix. So when they asked us to be part of the Carnival of Knowledge, we said to them, this is what we'd like to do, and it kind of fitted into their remit. So they were quite supportive of the idea, and they're actually quite good in terms of their own sort of like research and kind of production in looking at sort of like, they've just done a trip to the Amazon where they've kind of used this really kind of weird route to kind of make a limited edition range of gin. So it kind of fits into what their activity is about as well.
How did you start out?
It's a weird. I actually used to be an interior designer, so my kind of journey into food was a bit random. I had a design company, and we were badly hit by the sort of financial crisis in 2007, 2008, and sort of I've always been into cooking and I've always cooked, but my sort of journey into doing it kind of to this scale has been a sort of a gradual learning curve. It started off doing quite small scale sort of supper clubs for my friends in my area, and then as my interest in cooking grew and my kind of like sort of my dabbling with other things kind of like expanded, then I got a lot of interest from brands, and they helped me sort of like build up the business to kind of where it is now, where we sort of play around with all sorts of things.
Is there an idea you haven't explored yet that you think might be kind of risky that you're waiting to explore, or people might not be ready?
The insects was it's quite far out as it is. I think we want to play around with insects a lot more, and we also we've been talking about sort of like lab cultured meats as well. That's something that's sort of on the kind of the culinary horizon that we think will probably have a massive part to play in kind of like our eating habits in the future. We know there's some people in the States who've been working on it and sort of there's apparently a burger that's going to be coming out sometime next year with like a £300,000 price tag, which is being grown in a lab completely. So if we had the kind of the money and the kind of the kit, we would like to play around with something like that, but for now, insects is where we're gonna stay.
I noticed, like in the Bombay video, there was a lot of intimacy between kind of the people serving the food and the food itself. Like the relationship between sex and food in that video seemed really, really strong to me. Like, can you talk about like sex and food?
Ooh. I mean, that wasn't intentional. I think.
Like there's, you know, like with the women, you know, there's kind of this sucking a foam out of it. It was all just, it was a little bit too much for this early in the morning.
I think like the kind of like food and kind of cooking, it's all quite a sort of intimate and communal activity anyway. And I think like, you know, with the stuff that we try to do, no matter what form it takes in, we always like to sort of just break down the barriers and take away some of the protocol that you tend to find around food and eating generally. And whether it's just like, you know, licking ketchup off your fingers or something like that, there's always going to be an element that's quite essential or quite tactile in the whole process of like food.
Have you ever found people just kind of going, no, I can't?
Not really. I mean, we've been quite good at most people who, I think there's enough people out there who want to kind of like interested and varied experiences, and they tend to seek out people like myself and other kind of food kind of creatives because they want to do something that's different from the norm. And, you know, if we've had issues with people who don't like what we're doing, then it's fine. We just like don't come back. Yeah, they all don't. None of them want it at all. They kind of, they want their own thing, and it's quite. You just have to find a sort of a balancing act where you can kind of, you know, they come to you because they want something that's kind of like unique and innovative, and then as soon as you start telling them what you want to do, they just say no. And so you kind of have to sort of massage their egos a little bit and convince them that it's going to really work out. And we've sort of done a thing where sometimes we just do jobs for the brands and our heart and soul's not necessarily in it, but it then frees us up, especially in terms of money, to then go off and then do our own thing where we can kind of put all of our complete passion in it, and it sort of keeps us relevant and they keep coming back, and you just keep doing that sort of dance.
After we did a gig like Slow and just did for the money for a friend, do they sometimes come back and then let you do more innovative stuff? Or do they stick to that? You cook really well, stick to that.
There's like a sort of inherent hierarchy of people who never get it. So you always get, you know, like we have some really long-standing relationships with some of the brands that we work with because we have good relationships with some of the people who work for the brand, and it's just, you know, you just kind of, it's the way of business. You just sort of keep it safe enough for the sort of the big wigs to be happy, but then you have some room for maneuver sort of down the road that you can keep doing like interesting stuff. No. No, sorry.
How do you see how and food as an example that chick nowadays goes within 34 to 38 days into this little shop?
Yeah.
It's filled with shit actually. So how can we create more awareness of those things and help?
I think it's like chefs really have the kind of responsibility to kind of promote kind of like good food practice, because professionally they're all, I mean, most these sensible chefs are quite serious about where they get their produce from. You know, there's kind of rules about shelf life and that sort of stuff, but they don't really talk about it when they're kind of like giving the product out to people. And I think, yeah, the consumers don't really know, you know, they're not sort of like given sort of clear examples of how they should sort of like source their own produce. And I think there needs to be a kind of like a movement to kind of get chefs and food professionals and creatives to really start to emphasize that a lot more, so that it can trickle down and people can sort of look up and go, that's a really cool idea. And I mean, there are a few people, but I think it could be a lot more widespread.
What were Hendrix, or what was it, Bombay Sapphire, what was their reaction when he said, we want to do something like insects? How did you get that?
Hendrix, I mean, they were skeptical to begin with, but we sort of drew it all out, and they kind of reluctantly kind of agreed. And it was only after we did, because we've done 2 events with them now, it was only after we did the first press event and actually the response was really good, that then all of a sudden they were like, yeah, this is really great. And then all of a sudden private jets and all the rest of it was like, yeah.
How did you get them to even agree to the press event?
It was just part of the kind of like, if you fuck this up, we're never going to work with you again sort of gamble. I think we kind of, it's a tricky one, because most people tend to fall behind a particular kind of sort of banner in terms of what they promote or what they sort of encourage. We try to sort of say all of it is kind of relevant, and it's sort of everyone engaged with everyone's sort of perspective and supported the kind of producers who are sort of doing things that are kind of ethical and, you know, kind of good and sustainable. Then there wouldn't really be an argument to be had from anyone. You know, I think large scale produced food is not necessarily good for us. And the more we try to sort of disengage with that and actually use stuff that's sourced locally, or at least, you know, if it's not going to be like round the corner, at least from Britain and so on and so forth, then we're just doing our bit to sort of take a bit of the pressure off the sort of the global system. And if everyone did that globally, then a lot of things would change.
Do you have anything that you particularly won't touch?
Not really, because like to some degree, you know, you're not going to be able to do that, and that's why part of like what we're prepared to sacrifice is kind of a key question. I mean, a lot of the stuff we try to get from the UK, but having a Mexican restaurant, it's a bit like it's not possible. So like all of our fresh stuff comes from the UK, all of our dried stuff comes from Mexico, from a Mexican supplier, and you know, we try and balance it out. And our style is quite contemporary as well, so we sort of, where possible, we sort of take a Mexican inspired Mexican dish and we sort of give it a bit of a tweak so that it's a bit more sort of like European or a bit more fusion.
Yeah, and say with the phenomenon of Punch Drunk and Secret Cinema, like the boundaries are completely blurred and the fourth wall is completely broken down.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you did an immersive dining experience. I just wondering if you could give us some examples of an immersive dining.
I mean, that's an example of how we do it in a sort of an immersive way. Like there are a lot of people who are doing sort of like theatre and food type things, so we've always tried to stay kind of a little bit clear from that, because that's not what we're about in terms of our kind of personal interest. But we do try and bring food to life one way or the other. So if it's not with performers like we had at Bombay Sapphire, it could be, I mean, we did an event with Häagen-Dazs where we launched a flavour of ice cream for them, and rather than just do a sort of like tasting thing where you just eat the ice cream, we actually worked with a perfumer and we kind of used the kind of ingredients that made the flavour of ice cream, extracted the essential oils, and then we actually made perfume from the ice cream, which we then gave to the guests on their way home, just to kind of create that connection between the product, but in a way that didn't involve food necessarily. Sorry.
Do you ever host events that are more participatory and features that people attending that are involved making the food?
Not really. We do a lot of stuff with the cocktails where we try to get all of our guests involved in making the drinks at the dinner. So we did a series of dinners with Pernod Absinthe a year or so back, and all the drinks were kind of like, there was 10 dinners. We worked with 10 sort of bartenders from 10 sort of top end bars in London. They kind of designed a sort of a pairing cocktail menu with our food, but all the guests made their drinks at the table before each course was served. So we tried to kind of get people involved in the sort of the most efficient way possible. Right, mate. I don't know if they could be trusted with things like that. I mean, I guess it all boils down to, you know, the ethics of everything. You know, with the horse meat scandal, you could kind of see that it was just purely just trying to maximize profit that led to stuff like that happening. You know, if sort of retailers and food producers were doing it solely because they wanted to kind of meet the world's demand in the most efficient way possible so that everyone benefits, then fine. But if it's about, let's just produce a ton of meat that we can sell really cheap to as many people as possible, then it's not, you know, I wouldn't feel confident in them to kind of like to sort of do it. But I think if a lot of the sort of high-end chefs really sort of championed and pushed for kind of change, then maybe industry would sort of pay a little bit of attention, and governments and so on and so forth.
We had the whole molecular gastronomy thing, which I hope is dying a death.
Oh, I love really molecular gastronomy.
But I'm wondering, like, what's next? Like, because you're kind of on the experimental fringes, looking at kind of lab process meats and insects and stuff like that. Is there something else that's happening as well that you can see on the horizon?
I think one of the trends that I've kind of seen coming up now, and sort of the whole thing, I hate molecular gastronomy, is a bit of, I mean, it was a sort of a thing that got really kind of like used in a weird and sort of horrible way but the kind of the processes that were used to kind of do that really kind of poncy stuff actually has strong foundations in allowing us to like do a lot more with a limited range of ingredients. So if you look at like restaurants like Noma, which is, you know, like one of the best restaurants in the world, you know, their food is amazing, and they use the same techniques and the same principles that Heston uses in the fat duck to create smoke and fire and brimstone. But you know, they use it to kind of expand, you know, their limited seasonal palette to create beautiful dishes all year round. So I wouldn't hate on molecular gastronomy, because as a tool, it's actually really good in allowing us to give us flexibility to do some really interesting stuff. And I think like people like Noma are now inspiring a lot of other chefs to kind of follow similar traits in terms of working with seasonal and local produce, but using the kind of like the methods and the technology to kind of really kind of go to town in what you can kind of create. And I think there's going to be a lot of that.
It's more about finding a better application
exactly
for the technology.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'll stand down.
Cool. Yeah.
How long does it take you create an event?
It varies on the size and the scale. I mean, some of the ideas we've sort of, at least the kind of initial concept, we've probably thought about it a while ago, banked it, and then waited for the right kind of partnership to bring it off the ground. You know, usually it takes about a month to really sort of hone it down and get it all worked out, to kind of like play around with the dishes as well to make sure that they work and you're happy with them. You know, I've turned events around in like a week.
You have approval process in a way.
Yeah, you do tastings. Yeah, absolutely, because they won't let you do anything otherwise. It's ruined.